on the detail of the 7 separate statutory commands that have been consistently flouted by Secretary Mayorkas. I do think that, to your point, it is understandable when someone says the border is secure. You can't call this border secure.
No.
In any fairness. Now, you can call the border untenable, as Mr. Goldman calls it. You can call the border not secure, as President Biden calls it. But it's been a device. The Secretary of Homeland Security has come here and come to the Judiciary Committee and come to other committees on the Hill over and over and over again, and sat there and smugly defied this Congress to say, these committees, to say that this border is secure, so that he could continue a process of thoroughly undermining the Immigration and Nationalities Act, so that he could violate it in every particular, because it was purposeful. And it is only now that Mr. Goldman is constrained to say that the border is untenable. The situation at the border is untenable. Untenable cannot be reconciled with secure. It is not a secure border. I yield back to the Chairman.
Actually, it was Mr. Goldman who said it was a humanitarian crisis several months ago when I did lay out those processes, just FYI.
The Chairman yield for a quick question?
You got 7 seconds.
You listed out all the problems with fentanyl and human trafficking, and assuming that is correct, and assuming that the statistics about removals and fentanyl arrests and seizures are also correct, do you think the fact that we have a fentanyl problem in this country is grounds to impeach a cabinet secretary?
No, I think that's the effect. The cause is saying the Congress shall detain, shall deport if there's not credible fear, and he's done none of those. You look at the deportation.
What does that have to do with fentanyl?
We're not going to have a debate. I'm answering the question, and the time has expired.
Chairman?
Anybody? Mr. Magaziner, you recognize.
Thank you. A lot to respond to here. Let me first start by thanking the chairman for acknowledging that Joe Biden won the election. I know that some of his colleagues on the other side of the aisle disagree with that, but I thank him for acknowledging it. And I also thank him for acknowledging the fact that President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas have shifted personnel and resources to the southern border, yet another sign that the Secretary is doing his job in endeavoring to secure the border, despite the lack of support that he has been getting from the Republican Congress. It would be even easier if they would take up the supplemental funding request for 1,400 more Border Patrol officers, for 1,000 more CIS officers that the president has asked for. But of course, this isn't about actually solving the problem for my Republican colleagues. It is about having an issue. Let's take a step back here. There is a real risk that if we move forward with this, it will open the floodgates by establishing a new precedent for impeachment based not on the Constitution.
Will the gentleman yield?
In a minute. Based not on the Constitution, based not on bribery or treason or high crimes or misdemeanors, but policy differences and politics. There is no legal basis here in these articles. Article 1 alleges, as Mr. Bishop said, that the Secretary has been willfully ignoring the law. He is not. Under his watch, 4 million individuals have been removed from this country. The detention centers are at capacity because he is detaining people, and he is detaining people at approximately the same rate as under the Trump administration. In Article 2, we are debating Article 2, and we are reduced to talking about, is the word secure a fact or an opinion? Clearly, it is an opinion. Clearly, questions like, is the border open or closed, is based on opinion. And clearly, as Mr. Goldman has laid out, when the Secretary clarified his remarks about operational control, he was referring to the regulatory definition, not the statutory definition. But regardless, if we open the floodgates here, earlier, before the recess, I listed 5 times that Trump cabinet secretaries were caught in obvious lies in their testimony to Congress. Are we going to be doing baseless impeachments every time there's a game of gotcha that the opposite party is trying to play? The secretary has, as Mr. Bishop noted, appeared here again and again and again. I believe that was his quote. And my Republican colleagues have been parsing every word, trying to find something that could be construed as a mistruth. If we are going to be playing that game and playing this gotcha every single time somebody comes to appear before Congress, we are going to be opening the floodgates to baseless impeachments that are going to bring our country to a really perilous place. So, taking a step back here, I hope that we can get back to debating policy on immigration and the border. I hope that we can get back to talking about solutions. But instead, we run the risk of opening the floodgates here to baseless impeachments based on games of gotcha that are going to damage our republic. Mr. Pfluger?
Gentleman
I
yields. Did you ask him to yield, or?
I asked him earlier to yield.
Okay, you're recognized.
I appreciate the commentary on impeachments. I know you weren't here at the time of the last impeachment and the one previous to that, but I do appreciate the fact that you talked about baseless impeachments, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Does anyone else want to speak on the?
I'll yield to Mr. Swalwell. I have some time left.
Sorry, I was going to take 5 minutes. I thought he was done. Yeah.
Oh, do you want? Okay. I'll yield back then.
I now recognize Mr. Swalwell for 5 minutes.
When it comes to the border, you can, in Washington, admire the problem. You can weaponize the problem. You can politicize the problem. Or you can do the hard work and you can try and solve the damn problem. And that offer is there. That offer was there in 2014 when 68 Republicans, some of the most conservative Republicans, worked with Democrats in the Senate to come up with a bipartisan agreement. And that offer is there now. I want to talk first about Secretary Mayorkas. Look, this guy needs a badge to come into the building. He's here so often. I mean, he's literally the most testifying member of the cabinet. And he came here for worldwide threats, and to say that the border is not a threat, I mean, that's what we're all concerned about. So if he's here for worldwide threats, of course he's going to be talking about the border. That's his job, and he did, and that's where most of the questions were about. And any shortcomings that Mayorkas may have, frankly, are your fault. He's asking for authorities to do more, to have more border agents, to have more resources. And so his limitations are caused by you. You put him in place. You won't let him do it. And anyone who wants to proceed with this impeachment but voted against a guy who incited a mob and aimed a mob at a Capitol and had all of us running for our lives, if you didn't vote for that one, I don't understand how you can stand here and say this one is credible. The border is a real issue. It is a real issue. No one in this room wants an open border, despite the accusations that are made. We want security at the border. That's why Senator Lankford, the second most conservative member of the Senate, according to the American Conservative Union, has been working with Democrats and the president to immediately solve this issue. Senator Thune, he's no rhino, I don't think. Senator Thune said that the best chance to solve any issues at the border is under President Biden. And he said it's not going to happen under President Trump. And this is all in the spirit of what President Biden has done over the last 3 years. Bipartisan infrastructure bill, bipartisan CHIPS Act, bipartisan Safer Communities Act to address gun violence, all bipartisan. And we have an opportunity to do a bipartisan border bill and address the threats that I keep hearing here every day. But it's the difference between wanting to weaponize the problem and wanting to solve the problem. And you see so many on their side. Border Patrol agents, God bless them, they're heroes. They'll seize fentanyl, and to just own the libs, they'll say, see, this is Joe Biden's border crisis. I don't understand. Were they not supposed to seize the fentanyl? Like, they got the bad guys. They got the fentanyl. And by the way, 90% of the fentanyl is coming through ports of entry. That's a separate problem. The only high crime that is happening in this room is the fact that we are doing anything but working on a bipartisan deal that's taking place in the Senate. That's the crime. We're wasting time if we're not solving this. I just invite my colleagues, go back, please, to your election night, the first time that you ran. I remember it. My mom, my dad were there. They were more surprised than I was that I won. Your friends, your family are there, and you give that gracious speech about what you're going to do when you're going to go to Congress. And I don't think any of you said in that speech, as you thanked your supporters, I want to go to Washington to take on small issues. You all ran for Congress to go to Washington to take on big issues. And this is a big issue. It's not an easy issue. It's a complicated issue. But there's a bipartisan path forward. So I urge my colleagues, when it comes to the border, choose the fix, not the fiction. Choose the fix, not Fox. And choose the fix and not fame. And we can live up to the promise that we made to our constituents when we made that decision to run for Congress and do big things and solve tough problems. Now yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Guest, the gentleman from Mississippi, for 5 minutes on the amendment.
Again, very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I know I sound like a broken record, but again, for my colleagues across the aisle to say that Republicans don't want to fix the problem, that we've offered no solutions, that we've just sat around and hoped that the crisis at the border has gotten worse, is a complete fabrication and a completely false statement. Mr. Chairman, you've mentioned H.R. 2, the legislation that we passed out of this House, that H.R. 2 would have employed 22,000 CBP officers, the highest number in history. And not only do we authorize that in H.R. 2, but in the House Appropriations Package where we funded the Department of Homeland Security, we actually funded that. Our appropriations package that passed out of the House with no Democrat support funded 22,000 agents. We actually put more money in the budget than the president requested. It is $3 billion more than the budget was last year. And so when Republicans are plussing up what the presidential request is, when Republicans are investing in technology, where we're investing in retention bonuses, where we're hiring more agents, to hear my colleagues across the aisle say that we're doing nothing to solve the problem. And I continue to hear about this solution in the Senate. The Senate is crafting this bipartisan legislation, which now for weeks we've been waiting on bill text. Weeks. And has the Senate engaged the House? Have they engaged members of this committee? Maybe they have on the other side of the aisle. Maybe Ranking Member Thompson or maybe other members of the committee on the Democratic aisle have been briefed on what is going to be in the bill. But we have been shut out of those talks. We are not part of that solution. We don't know what that is. And so when people say we need to go ahead and we need to just adopt what the Senate is going to send over, I want to see what's in there. I mean, for weeks and weeks and weeks, we have been waiting on this. And so, Mr. Chairman, and the effort to not continue to beat a dead horse, Republicans have offered solutions. Republicans have offered solutions in funding. Republicans have offered solutions statutorily in H.R. 2. Republicans have time and time again done everything that we know to do to fix this crisis. But the one thing we can't do is we cannot make Secretary Mayorkas enforce the law. And the only remedy that we have left is to impeach the Secretary for his refusal to enforce the law and to impeach the Secretary for his lying to Congress. And I disagree with my colleagues across the aisle that a secure border is some vague term that nobody knows what it is and that we have no idea. And that when we start throwing facts at it about numbers of immigrants who are coming across the border each and every month, and we see those numbers continue to spike and continue to rise. We see the number of people who are dying every day from fentanyl. Yes, we're catching more fentanyl coming across the border, but do you know that the leading cause of death for individuals 18 to 49 are drug overdoses? Most of those caused by the use of fentanyl, and that fentanyl comes across our southern border. And so when confronted with those facts, do we have a secure border? The answer is clearly no. And the answer is no because this cabinet secretary refuses to enforce the law.
Gentleman yield.
I yield.
It's interesting. The point that you made about the House Republican DHS bill, including money for 22,000 more Border Patrol officers.
Agent total.
Agents. 3,000 more. Thank you. 22,000. 3,000 more. It is interesting. How can it be? We hear constantly from the other side of the aisle that Republicans won't support the additional spending, and yet that's in there. How do you reconcile those two? Here's the answer for Mr. and Mrs. America if they're watching this. They only want the money for one reason: to process more illegals into the country faster. That's what they want more money for. And if you think that solves the problem of the immigrants camped out on the sidewalk outside the Roosevelt Hotel in Mr. Goldman's district, it does not. It does not solve or alleviate the problems that are destroying New York City. It does not solve the problems that are destroying Chicago and Denver and so on and so forth. That ain't going to get it done. Yield.
The gentleman yields and the gentleman yields back. Is there anyone else who wishes to?
Mr. Chairman.
For five? Mr. Higgins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague, whom I regularly disagree with, but I genuinely respect, Mr. Goldman asked earlier, could any of us identify what, I believe your question was, could any of us identify what a secure border looked like?
Just to clarify, if I may.
I think so.
I said no two of you would
Yeah, well,
write
I'm
the
just one.
same specific definition,
I'm
which is
gonna
what
try
is
and give you an
required
answer.
for a false statement.
I'm going to try and give you an answer because it's pretty clear. You ready? 2019. That's what a secure border looked like. The third and fourth quarter, 2019. I skipped right over 2020. I'll give you all that because COVID interrupted the cartel operations. So we're going to skip those numbers. Let's go to pre-COVID numbers. Third and fourth quarter, 2019, 554,872 Southwest border CBP encounters. You had more than that in the last 2 months under this administration. How much money did we spend? Listen to me, America. The total budget for DHS in 2019 was 81 million. 81, it's a lot. I can't read this, my staffer. You got too many numbers here. Okay, here you go. Because I got 1 trillion numbers here. I know this wasn't. Is it 81 billion? We spent 81 billion. Listen to me. In 2019, we had the cartels on the ropes, and we spent 81 billion. Last year, they rolled over us. We're losing our country, and we sent DHS 101 billion. We spent more money, a lot more. In the Biden administration, we're giving it to Mayorkas. He's supposed to be the expert. I mean, honestly, what does President Biden know about securing the border? That's why he hired a Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. He hires this man, it was his 22 years of service. It's his first 19 we were fine with. These last 3, he's been destroying our country. And we're giving him more money to do it with. So what changed? My colleagues, what changed between 2019? You think the cartels changed? All of a sudden they got hungry for more money? No. Policy, executive policy out of our White House, out of your president, that began in January of 2021. This is why our country is disintegrating, America. And who's ultimately responsible for that? The expert that President Biden hired. That's who we're impeaching today. Because we asked him to resign, we asked him to correct. He quite pompously and arrogantly rejected all of that. and kept coming before this body and our colleagues in the Senate and tell them everything's cool.
Will the gentleman yield for a question?
I'm going to yield back to the chairman, if you don't mind, my friend, Mr. Goldman.
Do any other members? Ms. Titus, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But first, I want to just be sure that we understand what we're talking about the border being controlled by the cartels. You're suggesting that the cartels are controlling both sides of the border, and it's this nightmare. I'd like to quote for you Raul Ortiz, who is the chief of the U.S. Border Patrol. I will tell you that in certain areas, the cartels control an awful lot of the southern border south of the United States. They are not in the United States. They are south of the United States. And then you have Chief Patrol Agent Aaron Heike from the San Diego sector saying it's correct to say that the cartels don't actually control any land on the U.S. side of the border. So when we talk about the cartels controlling the border, let's be sure we tell the whole story. But it's not surprising that only tell part of it, because the hypocrisy of the people on that side of the aisle has just become so egregious over the course of the day that nothing surprises me. You sit here self-righteously attacking Mr. Mayorkas and saying he's not abided by the law, I guess the immigration and nationality law. He's lied, he's willfully done these things as though he has some personal motive for seeing the cartels bring in more fentanyl. He's broken the law, and that's why we've got to impeach him. So I would ask you, if somebody was accused or indicted or convicted of rape, would you think they broke the law? How about fraud? How about sexual harassment? How about sedition and subversion? And let's don't forget tax evasion. Do you all think those are laws that if you do those things, you've broken the law? Well, of course you have. And yet your candidate for president, who not a one of you have condemned or stood up and said, no, I'm not going to support that guy because he's broken all these laws. I hadn't heard you say it. You're fine to go down the path with him, but you want to attack Secretary Mayorkas for doing the best that he can and not violating any such laws as this. And
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. My friend from Louisiana, I have a question for you, if I may. I may not get the data right, but I believe you said that in the third and fourth quarter of 2019, there were approximately 500,000 encounters at the border. Is that right? And then over the past 2 months, there have been many more encounters at the border? So is it your view that more encounters at the border means that the Secretary of Homeland Security is doing a worse job?
The gentleman allow me to respond?
Yes, please, I yield.
Yes, sir. My perspective is likely quite different from yours, good sir. I'm a cop, and my data comes from boots on the ground. The effectiveness of our law enforcement operations under President Trump was a well-run machine because of policy.
I understand. I mean, I don't want to get into like a whole long thing.
You didn't
The only question I had, if I could
these
reclaim my
people
time.
coming in our country.
If I could reclaim my time, the only question I'm asking and the point I'm making is you're trying to make an argument that more encounters at the border means that our border is less secure.
Yes.
But what it actually means is that the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security are doing a better job of securing the border. Because you have more encounters with slightly more resources, as you said, which is on a pro rata basis doing a better job. So I'm glad, though, that my colleague from Louisiana has determined that secure, as included in Article 2 of the impeachment, is defined as the third and fourth quarter of 2019. So now we all know that that is the definition of secure that Secretary Mayorkas lied about when he said it's secure, and it's not what it was in the third and fourth quarter of
Representative Yield?
2019. I'll yield to Mr. Magaziner.
78% of southern border encounters were detained under President Trump. That's a pretty good number, 78%. 78% also during the Biden administration. It is the same percentage.
Time